documents. You've had a long history of doing research, and I'd like to have this opportunity for people to experience you directly.
Well, first of all, let me say this. I first met John-Roger back in 1978. I was at a bookstore, Dhammapada bookstore in Topanga Canyon, San Fernando Valley, no longer in existence. And I was looking at John-Roger's books, and what happened was I decided that, or at least determined that he was plagiarizing from Eckankar. And I was doing a research project at the time on Eckankar. This is back in 1977. So I wrote a letter to John-Roger asking him if he really was indeed plagiarizing. And what happened was he wrote me a letter back, about a 2 or 3 page letter, inviting me to come up to Mandeville Canyon, which I did. That was the first time I ever met him. I met him, I think it was in January, and it was 1978. The interview was about 5 or 6 hours, which was taped, and we discussed a variety of issues, his connection with Eckankar. So that's how I met him. We got along really fine. No problem.
Well, prior to that, could you tell us a little bit about your background, how you got into being interested in things like Eckankar?
Well, see, the thing with Eckankar, it started because I had read a book by Paul Twitchell called The Tiger's Fang, and had realized that he was initiated by Kirpal Singh, who died in 1974. And I was doing a term paper, California State University of Northridge. And the term paper started at 10 to 15 pages, eventually ballooned to about 150 pages, because I found out the founder of that religious movement, Twitchell, had lied about his life, claimed he was born in 1922, was born in 1908, claimed that all the books that he had written were original. They were ripped off from Path of Masters by Julian Johnson in 1939, and Scientology, L. Ron Hubbard's book. So what happened was I was doing this research project, interested in Eckankar, interested in new religious movements, which were related or somehow connected to Surat Shabd Yoga movements. And so John-Roger obviously fell within my purview.
And the studies you were doing on Eckankar eventually became a master's thesis?
No, what happened was it was my senior thesis at Cal State, and in 1978 it was about 150 pages. At that time I submitted it to Eckankar, who attempted to sue me for $2.5 million. But they eventually dropped that suit because they realized they wouldn't win. And eventually got published as a book and circulated throughout Europe, throughout North America.
And you have a copy of your book with you, I believe.
I do have a copy of my book right here. It's out of print, though. This is the last edition. We're doing a new edition. It'll be laser typeset, Making of a Spiritual Movement, Del Mar Press. But we're doing a new edition now.
Now, in this book, you discuss some of your research with John-Roger, and you include some comparisons, I believe, between Eckankar and MSIA, and cosmology.
Right. Essentially what I found out was that John-Roger was initiate, the second initiate, according to Eckankar's records. In Eckankar, he knew Paul Twitchell, met him personally. And he also ran a satsang group in Rosemead, California, on behalf of Eckankar. And there are some reports that when John-Roger was holding his satsangs, he would tune in to Brother Paul, kind of channel the spirit of Paul Twitchell. And there's no doubt in my mind that he really was a member of Eckankar. And that MSIA, when he incorporated and founded in 1968, is basically, fundamentally based on Eckankar. A ripoff, so to say.
So as far as the inner regions that Eckankar claims, MSIA regions...
But the same, they correlate. What happened was Twitchell in 1971, a book called The Spiritual Notebook, developed his own cosmology, 12-plane cosmology, with his own kind of peculiar sounds. He wanted to break off from Kirpal Singh, Radhasoami, Ruhani Satsang, and develop his own cosmology, and in so doing, develop these kind of weird nuances, like there's 10,000 violins in the 7th plane or the 8th plane. John-Roger, since he was a member of Eckankar, read a lot of Eckankar books, took over that cosmology verbatim, published it in a book called The Sound Curve.
Now, how do you know this from John-Roger personally, from your interview?
Yeah, I remember talking to John-Roger about his association with Eckankar. He claimed that although he was not formally a member, he highly admired the teachings of Paul Twitchell. He was on their mail correspondence list, but he felt his association was one of a friend, not one of a disciple.
I believe Gordon Melton once said that John-Roger was being considered for taking over Eckankar.
No, that's not true. What happened was John-Roger wanted to take over. And in 1971, when Paul Twitchell died, what John-Roger did was he showed up in Las Vegas, Nevada. And I think, quite seriously, and he even kind of conferred it to me in our conversation, that he may have been appointed. He was going to be the second living Ek master. Instead, a guy named Sri Darwin Gross gets appointed. And it's true that John-Roger was disappointed, there's no doubt about it.
And then afterwards, there was a relationship between Eckankar and MSIA in terms of allegedly taking over, or mimicking their discourses. And
the one thing you got to remember.